Good morning, and thank you all for taking the time to join this informational seminar. My name is Louisa Sagarese. I am the chairperson of the Managers Committee for Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors, and with me here today is Matthew Amato, my vice chair on that committee. This webinar has been put together by the Managers Committee of Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors. I'd like to start off by thanking Craig Ambrosio and Stan Ferriolo and the Township of Toms River for graciously taking the time to join us to help educate our realtors and the private property owners so that we may better work together with the towns and understand the expectations involved from all perspectives. As a reminder to all attendees, we understand that this process is continuing to evolve and has had a direct impact on our business and the ability to serve the public. This webinar is not intended to be a debate or a forum to express our approval or disapproval of the topics discussed. Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors, along with the New Jersey Realtors, are committed to continuing our partnership with the Township of Toms River to identify areas where adjustments may be beneficial. While those conversations are ongoing, this webinar is intended as an educational update only and seeks to provide you an understanding of the changes that have been made since a new ordinance was adopted in December of 2021. Please enter any questions into the Q&A box on your screen, and we will do our best to include them in the seminar. We have also assembled the questions submitted by you ahead of time and will be touching upon those as well. With that, I am pleased to introduce Craig Ambrosio and Stan Ferriolo, Chief Code Enforcement Officer and the Supervisor for the Township of Toms River.
Thank you, Louisa and Matt, for the introduction.
Thank you.
We also are committed, that's why we're here, to help educate and work hand in hand with the real estate industry and the other professionals working within the real estate industry. As you may all know or not know, last November/December, there were several changes or updates that came from discussions with groups such as yours and the general community. The changes, one of the first questions that I received from you was the changes for that, and we can go through them, name them off. One is the fees changed from $300 down to $225. There was a change or an addition of what's called a PRC fee, which is adult communities, but it's restricted to the planned retirement communities. And in Toms River, that's virtually only 4. That's Greenbrier, that's Gardens of Pleasant Plains, Holiday City, and Lake Ridge. We've removed the pool bonding and grounding requirement. However, the boat lift and jet ski certification from an electrician remains in place. We have created, at the request of different organizations, a pre-written certification for either HVAC contractors, chimney contractors, or home inspectors to fill out so that they're uniform and they know exactly what we're looking for. We've gone ahead and offered a conditional MCCUO, which is intended to go ahead and provide another means of moving forward with the sale process without completing all of the requirements. However, I would like to stress that that's for non-UCC or non-life safety hazard items. And to give an example, to keep it in perspective, if there's a property with no pool and a couple sections of fence are down, that's really not life safety hazards. So therefore, that could proceed with a condition. However, if there's no heat in the house or the roof is collapsing, we can't. So there's 2 different extremes to that example. We've also created some options for sidewalks, or the community sidewalks or roadway sidewalks, right-of-way sidewalks, for the seller to go ahead and proceed by applying for the permit road opening permit and paying the bonds, which will then allow them, once that's in place, allow the sales to go through. That bond will allow us to go ahead and say, if not done in X period of time, the town will use that bond, have it done, and everybody's all fine. However, there's also another one where the seller doesn't want to do anything, but the buyer agrees to sign an affidavit stating that they will accept that responsibility and perform the work within 6 months. And if not, they will have proceedings held against them. There's no initial re-inspection fee for properties with less than 3 violations. So if you have a couple of minor little things and we have to return, we're not going to charge to go back there. We've always done, since its inception, we've accepted video and documentation proof to eliminate the need for bothering people to be inconvenienced by the re-inspection. For example, if something, a GFCI was missing or something was broken, a photo of it repaired and or documentation from the repair contractor will go ahead and suffice. If we don't have to return, we take that, we place it in our files, and that violation is now considered abated, so that it moves forward. So that helps time-wise. It keeps you guys from having to open the house or the seller from opening a house, us setting up another inspection. So that's moved along fairly well. We've always offered that, but that's part of what we're really continuing to elaborate. Another good example we used was a pool gate that didn't self-close and latch. We're allowing somebody to send a video of a fully open gate, letting it go, it closing and latching. We're all good with that. We just want to make sure stuff is done. So that eliminates the need for anything, a re-inspection. I would assume you want to proceed with some of your questions.
Yeah, so so first of all, thank you guys again, from me for being here, taking the time today. We do very much appreciate it. You've covered a couple of the initial questions I have, but I would one of the questions that we had submitted was around staffing and your department and how obviously this is a big change for you guys as well as for the public and for the folks on the other end doing the work to get it ready for the inspections. How has staff been adapting to the changes, and have you been able to add any additional staff members to accommodate the new rules and the changes that have been made?
The changes actually depleted some of our obligations. It really, from a staffing level, there's less work with some of the changes that were made on the revision, if you will. So that hasn't been a problem. I think that our in-house time frame is more than adequate to go ahead and serve the community. If everything, and this is all things being equal, if everything's submitted, everything's appropriate, complete, we're scheduling inspections within 2 days in most cases, which I don't think is a hindrance at all.
No, that I can tell you, I go for COs in many towns. 2 days it's a big win when you get in there and you can schedule it. Again, understood that you have to have everything together.
Yeah, the key to that is having everything complete. Sure. No inconsistencies.
One of the other questions we received regarding the application process for the CO in Toms River is around permissibility of application, even if there are open permits on that property. Is it allowed to begin the application process even with open permits existing on that property?
The application process has always been allowed to happen with open permits. However, at one point in time, we were minimizing ordering the actual inspection until some of these things were cleared up. This was going over with the state legislative committee. This was one of their concerns. We administratively will use our discretion, and I'll give two separate examples. If we have an open permit that really is nothing more than an administrative approval, we're going to go ahead and go forth and start working with the seller or their representative to proceed with the inspection. However, the other extreme where you have, a double-sized house addition that never got permits, we're not going to proceed. So we're using our discretion wherever we can proceed, we will. Secondly, because of the UCC process, which might answer another one of your questions, we have never been a hindrance to that production, especially since we know it takes time for the UCC construction official inspections. If the buyer or their representative works with us, keeps us informed as to the progress, we're going to make sure that we're done at and or at the same time as the construction officials done and cleared.
Yeah.
And Craig, kind of piggyback on the answer you just gave, I have another question that is kind of a scenario that has been submitted. Let's say an owner, an agent, they do all the paperwork, they apply for the CO, and the open permits are discovered. The inspector comes out and the permits are, they pass. They notify your department, and then they have been told in the past that they have to contact the building department to have that permit closed out. The question is, it's been taking up to 10 days to close that permit out. Is that process, could that be shortened to less than 10 days? Because that has been holding up a lot of transactions.
Let me clarify your question, because I read the same questions. You were kind enough to give me in advance so we'd be prepared.
Yeah.
When you say the inspector goes out, you're referring to the construction official inspector, okay? That construction official inspector goes out. Now, why that lag is one, the UCC by the state of New Jersey establishes timeframes. So our building department will always quote the timeframes. They are constantly trying to achieve better, okay? If they quote 10 days, they're trying for it to be 3. If they quote 10 days, they're trying for it, depending on the individual circumstances, it may end up being 7, but they quote what is actually in their purview. Secondly, one of the reasons why, or where it's misunderstood a little bit, is let's take the scenario where we have multiple disciplines of inspectors. We have a fire inspector, we have an electrical inspector, we have a plumbing inspector. Even though these individuals have done their inspections, that's only a small part, because now somebody's got to look at the overall package, and make sure it's all together, cross the T's and dot the I's, and then approve the submittal, okay? So just because the inspection was done doesn't mean the process is complete. And that's very similar to our perspective too. A lot of times we do the inspection and everybody says, okay, we're done and we're all done. No, it's the package, because it's a complete overall look at the background, the submittals, and the inspection. The inspection is only a part of the three-pronged process. So hopefully that answers the question. And it's not within our power to change the UCC regulations. Not to go into too much of that dynamic. Realistically, although Toms River pays these officials, they answer to the UCC. They don't answer to us as it relates to stuff like that. All right?
Sure.
Hopefully
Thank you for clarifying that, Craig.
So the, on a couple of these questions, what I'm hearing you guys say is effectively, it really is determined both by what's submitted to you guys as a town and as officials, and and the complexity of the scenario. I think from a realtor's perspective, this being kind of the first step in this and what I'm about to say, but educating us to do that better for our clients when we have the responsibility to do that. and help us to educate our own clients better when they're handling it themselves is a massive benefit. And certainly, I think I speak for most of the realtors I deal with when I say we do strive to do our best. So and want to make this as smooth as possible. So this exchange is hopefully the first of many, not only with Toms River, but with towns throughout Monmouth and Ocean County, to better understand and help both sides get this as smooth as possible. We have a couple of questions, I believe, that are coming in right now.
And if I could just make a comment on that, a part of what we're also doing, Craig, to help streamline this process is that we are letting the residents of Toms River, when they own a house and they're considering selling it, we're letting them know right up front. One of the first processes that we're doing, we make them aware of the new process to obtain the CO, so they get a head start on it. So possibly even before the house even hits the market, we've already started the process for the CO application, so there'll be no delay in it whatsoever. So that we have found, Matt and I both, we do pass that word on along to all the agents and that are in the industry. And
Lisa, thank you for pointing that out. We acknowledge and respected that. That's one other item that was changed with the ordinance update, and that we've changed it from the CCO is good. It used to be 180 days. Now it's 270. So it went from 6 months to 9 months. So just in case the market slows down or speeds up, a seller shouldn't be worried about their CCO expiring. So that we want to encourage exactly what you're talking about. Get it early. The sooner, the better off we are.
Sure. Yeah. The UCC regulates. Does the UCC regulate the administrative process? Is one of the questions we're getting from attendees. I guess the motivation behind the question is there a way to speed up the approval of the application to get the inspection from the building department? Is there anything that can be done on our end and the public's end to help that along?
I can only answer the UCC regulations from my knowledge. That would really be better answered by the construction official, but my knowledge of this is that the UCC gives the timelines that our construction official is allowed to be quoted and or held to. So for instance, a certain application or a certain type of sequence, UCC says you're allowed to take this amount of time. That's what the building department will quote. That's what the building department is allowed to quote. And then from that, it will, again, whenever possible, achieve a much lower number. Our zoning department also does the same thing. They say 10 days, they strive for 2 to 3. Hyper complex submittal is a little bit different story, but they strive for quicker.
Okay. And another question just came in here, Craig. Does the fire certification need to be done prior to the town inspection?
No, it does not. We will not hold up the inspection for that. However, it is required to achieve the final certification for CO.
Okay.
But the order of that is either or.
Either or, you can order it simultaneously. You can order it. We also have the ability, because we're using, even though it's a separate independent entity, the fire district and the fire bureau, we have the ability to see that they've scheduled and or gone ahead and approved that smoke cert. Let's call it a smoke cert, but it's smoke, CO, and fire extinguisher. So we have the ability to see that too. So we're monitoring that at the same time.
And Craig, can you just focus on how it's 2 different ways to apply? First we apply for the Toms River fire certification on one site, and then the actual application for the CO can either be done online, or we can mail a check or drop it off to the township. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more in detail for all the residents that are out there?
Either come in and pick it up. We have them here. They're available online. They can be filled out in advance and then come in. You can fill them out online. They're a fillable PDF, so that it can give you all of the items that are needed to be gathered there. You can then submit that online to the attached email. It's an email that's dedicated to the MCCOs, just as we have emails dedicated to just the rentals. So on the different applications, it tells you where it's sent. So they're all somewhat categorized. Payment online can occur, but I'll admit it, the township has a third party that does this. It can cause a slight delay in the fee register. That way beyond my control, because we don't get advised that it's been paid sometimes for 24 hours. Unfortunately, that's a delay that's occurred. Overall, I think the township is looking at trying to lessen that for all departments, but that's the unfortunate situation we're in. You can speed up the process by actually delivering the check or coming in and paying by credit card. We don't get notified you paid until a little bit later. So that answers that. Now, it's on our website, the Toms River Township. You go to community, not community service, community development and or housing code enforcement. Under that section, you will find all your documents, anywhere from rentals to go ahead and CCOs, transfer of titles, your separate forms that we talked about earlier for heat certifications. They are either separate and or part of the package. The package includes the instruction sheet of what you should go ahead and fill out in line. The other item is, if you don't know where I just talked about, you open up the website, you go to the top, fill it and say MCCUO. It'll bring you there too.
And you said they're also available in the office. Where is the office located?
Office is 33 Washington Street. We're in the lower level of Town Hall. We have a double window where you can come up and see us. They're sitting outside. We have a little kiosk there where you can physically pick it up. In the near future, we intend to have a computer if you wanted to come there and fill it out there. Either way, but it's easily done there.
So jumping back a little bit in terms of, can you just touch on the differences between a rental? Let's for the purposes of this discussion, let's keep it as let's pretend it's an annual rental for the CCO and a sale, and how those processes are different, how they're the same, and anything you think both the public and the realtor community should be aware of.
Rental inspections are far more in depth. The MCCUO is a vaguer overall view of the property. This is where we've had a little bit of trouble in that, or miscommunication, I'd say. When people are intentionally buying a house to become a rental home or an investment property, they're a little bit bewildered when they just passed the MCCUO, but because it's a minimal standard. Then when we go to do the rental, well, we just passed the MCCUO. Why is this an issue? It's a different standard. The standard is set forth by the International Property Maintenance Code and our ordinance for rentals, which goes into a little bit more detail for unwitting occupants that should have the safer environment. Whereas if somebody's buying it for their own occupation, they can go ahead and make their own choices. A little bit, so it's more in depth for rentals.
Can you talk about a couple of, if you could, off the top of your head, what are some of the things the inspector looks for on a rental versus that they're really focused on, just so we're aware?
Really minimized things such as peeling paint or finishes. That's not an issue with an MCCUO. We know that people and houses need to be renovated and updated and so on. However, for a rental, you can't have that for a multitude of reasons. Paint chips, which goes into a whole other subject that you guys, I'm sure, are aware of with the potential lead stuff now. Screens. We don't care whether a house has screens if you're buying it as a sale. However, for a rental, between the months of, say, for instance, April and November, you have to have screens in the windows. That's a HUD standard. So those are items that are two different items that wouldn't be the same as a sale.
Sure.
Craig, can we touch upon the transfer of title option in Toms River? I've gotten some questions. It's taken a pretty long time to obtain this. Do you see that changing in the near future? And can you also explain what a transfer of title is for the viewers out there who do not know what that is?
Okay, transfer of title, one, to answer that question, I would have to, one, disagree with the assessment of the time that it takes. If a complete application comes in with the appropriate documents, we're talking about 2 to 3 days to at least get that part started. So we don't feel that from our internal workings that there has been a time problem with the transfer of title. Each one that we investigate, Stanley and I look at these daily and are scrutinizing why did it take so long. Is what we find out that, well, they didn't send in the affidavit, or the affidavit wasn't signed, or the affidavit wasn't notarized, or they didn't send it in at all, or they sent in only the affidavit, but not the application. So complete submittal is going to be your biggest key to the time frame that it takes. So if all things being equal, to answer, we don't have any changes for transfer of title in play. To give you an overall idea, the only difference between a transfer of title from our time-wise is there's no inspection. We're still doing the background. And one of the reasons why this was even offered, even the MCCUOs, if we find during our research that this was a substantially damaged home or that there was open permits, with the transfer of title, we're going to list those for the buyer, saying you're buying it with these, you're accepting that you're buying it with these. That's really what that's doing. So we disclose what we have on record, and we then really file the paperwork and submit those.
And another thing to tie in with the time frame, for example, on the transfer of titles, we took in one on the 25th. I just issued it this morning to the seller. So we're talking about a two-day time frame for that example this week to do all of the research, process the application, and then me go through, put all the discrepancies on a certification, send it to the property owner. So normally in my experience where it's taken longer than that has been if we're going through our records and we see, there's 10 different violations from different departments. We like to also reach out to those departments to see, is this still an issue? Is this still something we need to tell the property owner about? So sometimes it's not always straightforward where we have a violation on this day and it was closed on this day. Sometimes there's a lot of information that our staff has to go through and decipher instead of just throwing it on a piece of paper and letting someone else deal with it as the buyer or the seller. We like to try to get it as clear cut as possible so they know what they're getting involved in or know what they need to take care of when they assume the property. So that's a big part of the transfer of titles. Some of them can be very complex and some are very straightforward.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Stan.
that, Stan.
Yes, and another question we have is there is no fire inspection required for a transfer of title?
That is up to the Bureau of Fire Prevention.
Okay.
State statute says that there is any change of ownership. However, we're going to accept whatever the Bureau of Fire Prevention provides. In some cases, and I don't want to speak to their policies and procedures, the interpretation over the years has changed. That's their interpretation. If they want to go ahead and submit something, let's say, for instance, somebody's buying and intend to tear down a home and rebuild something else, I've heard of fire accepting an affidavit to that effect. Fire then says, okay, you're clear to proceed. That clear to proceed is still providing us with something from the Bureau. So the acceptance or the denial of the need for a fire inspection solely lies statutorily with the Bureau of Fire Prevention. So whatever they submit, if they submit it that they're okay with it, we're good. That hopefully that answers your question. Good.
Yeah.
So a couple of quick questions. Actually, on the fire side, oh no, I'm sorry. We already covered that one. So does the town need the buyer's name to be on the CCO ahead of time? You know, we were talking about doing this early. The buyer's name can be added at the end. Is that correct?
It can be added at any point in time,
Unless it's for title.
unless it's a transfer. That's a good point, Sam. Transfer of title has to be on to begin with.
Sure.
Well,
Another question was coming in, huh?
until we have that. It's not going to proceed until we have that name, because without that name, you can't have the affidavit from the buyer saying that they acknowledge it.
To clarify though, you have, well, so that's for transfer title.
It's for title only.
So if I can, there's kind of 4 or 5 questions in the same vein. They're fee questions, they're money questions. So I just wanted to touch on them. Can you just restate the old fee versus the new fee? I know that was a change. So was it 300 to 225?
The 300 was its fee for any of them.
Yeah.
In the initial ordinance, that was changed to 225 for all homes except for planned retirement communities. And that's documented planned retirement. That's 175.
And that's 175. Okay, so it's not an additional cost for a CO in, for instance, Holiday City. It's actually reduced.
A reduced
The break.
Well, one of the reasons why, because after the initial ordinance was written, calculating times, the idea that you're gonna have a finished basement or additions in these planned retirement is minimized. So it's a much more straightforward inspection. Doesn't mean we don't find deficiencies, but it's a much easier process. So thereby we can allow the reduced cost and still be supporting ourselves.
Understood. I think a question just came in because they weren't sure if it was more or less.
Understood.
I think that was the two. And the other question was in terms of the bond for a sidewalk. Do you know what the cost or approximate cost of that is? Is it a per linear foot cost? Is it a?
That's going to be calculated by the engineering department. I wouldn't want to speak to exact on that, but it simply needs to be done and in the process.
Okay.
What they're using is an estimated cost that if the applicant defaults, they could reasonably have it done by a third party.
Sure.
That's really what it boils down to.
But so it can be substantial, obviously, the bond for that.
If it's linear feet, if you have, 200 feet of sidewalk, it's different than if you have one flag that's raised, even though it may be a foot in the air, it's still only one flag, so.
Okay. We still have some questions coming in. A lot of them are repeat questions, Craig. If you don't mind, I just want to recap a couple of things. Some questions are they recommending a seller obtain a CO before selling? And how long is the CO good for? I know we just did that, but would you mind repeating it in case we had a viewer log in later?
MCCUO, after it's given or issued, is 270 days, so 9 months.
And that's a change from 6 months, is that correct?
That's a change from 6 months, yes.
Okay. Okay, and the fire inspection, do you know how long the fire inspection is good for?
Months.
6
6
months.
months from what our understanding is.
Okay. I think we have one last question. I think we've covered most of everything. A lot of the questions are similar and you've answered them.
There was one more as again, a little bit of a repeat, but we just want to make sure it's covered. When you mentioned the form that your department created for the HVAC certification, who is allowed to complete that form? Is it the home inspector and a certified, a licensed HVAC contractor? Are those the?
HVAC and chimney respectively. So for instance, chimney cert can't sign for an HVAC, but and home inspectors for both. We are finding very little home inspectors are providing that, but we are accepting that because the home inspection laws allow that to be within their purview.
Sure.
Doesn't mean they're going to choose to do that, but they're allowed to, so we accept it.
So potentially from putting my realtor hat on again, it may be something we want to ask of if the home inspector is willing to do ahead of time of a home inspection and mention that to our homeowners, so that, potentially they can, get two birds with one stone.
So, correct. However, in looking at these documents, there's two different ways to do this. The owner can sign an affidavit saying, hey, I've had this done within the past year, and it's been cleaned and certified. Here's the document. That's an easy one. The other one is if they have the heat cert guy come in and actually do it for the purpose of that. But we're accepting stuff from up to a year before the application. So if you have New Jersey natural gas, which a lot of people, pay the $75, $80 a year, and they have to come in and do the annual cleaning, you provide us with that within 1 year, we're there. Okay, we're accepting that with your statement. Yes, we've had this done. Here's the receipt for such, and we move on. While we're on this, let me, because we're finding a lot of these, and it's, I don't want to say it's counterproductive. If you're going to send us a heat cert, please don't send us one that says the unit needs to be replaced. We are finding so many of them where the contractors say, hey, this thing's shot, you need a new one. You don't need to send us those. They're not going to give you, we're not going to accept that as a certification.
You get the same thing with the chimneys.
The chimneys too.
Is unsafe, do not use. And people will submit that as, here's my cert.
And which is the exact reason why this process is there. But if you have one of those saying that it's unsafe, it's not going to do you any good giving it to us because we're going to see it. So it's not necessarily the realtors I'm saying, but make sure you look at it and see what it says before you submit it, because it's continuous. It's almost it's counterproductive.
And Matt, from a realtor's point of view, it may not be a bad idea for us to start recommending to our sellers, maybe to get a pre-home inspection done ahead of time. So we even have that information available for you ahead of time with the heating and certification on it and all that.
And even if it's not the home
Yeah.
inspector, I often recommend that getting heat furnace serviced ahead of time is good. And you can get
Right.
sign off on it right then.
That's your cheapest route.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah, because they're making money on the service at that point anyway. They don't mind writing a letter saying, I just serviced it, it's good.
Yeah, but they don't even need a letter. All they need to do is show us that receipt that, let's call it New Jersey natural gas. That's not a open market. So
Sure.
and it's using, hey, you buy it for the same, it's an insurance policy for your unit. People buying or selling, if you're not taking advantage of that, it's kind of silly for the amount of money. So just that alone covers it. So if there is something wrong with it, minor things they're going to put a new pilot thermal sensor. They're going to put different things on there as part of the program. So that's a lot cheaper than the whole home inspection.
What is the fee for just the transfer of title? I'm sorry, I don't know if we covered.
Transfer title's only $175.
That's 170.
That's what it was, and that's what it stayed as.
Okay.
Okay.
And the rental CCO is every 3 years, is that correct? Despite if someone stays?
3 years on the mainland. Seasonal rentals are every year.
Okay. Is there, there was a couple of questions around the 3-year re-inspection. Is there what's the driver there for the 3 years for annual rentals on the mainland?
That's been probably 6 years ago, at least, since that came into play. What we were finding was a lot of our code enforcement complaints or housing complaints where, somebody lived in a house renting it for 30 years, nothing operational, really unacceptable living conditions. We felt it better to do that. Furthermore, that's more substantiated by the new lead laws. They're requiring us to do them every 3 years. So they kind of go hand in hand. We have to get back in there anyway for the renewals on those. So it's gonna have to take place. By the way, that lead and the insurance bit has nothing to do with Toms River Township. That was done by Governor Murphy in Trenton. We're simply charged with implementing it, monitoring it, and going ahead and letting you know when your insurance is due.
Yeah.
To make a little bit light
We
out.
know that well, from the Monmouth Ocean Regional Realtors perspective, we've been getting updates from our legal gurus
Yeah.
on the regular basis on that front.
Craig, does Toms River suggest doing an Oprah request to confirm open permits prior to submitting for the CO? Do you recommend that?
I would have to say it. I would have to say it's everybody's right to open public records. I don't know that it's going to affect positively or negatively on this process, because we're going to be doing the same thing.
Okay.
And so when the inspectors are out there and they come across a bathroom or a basement that was finished by a prior owner, what is the recommended procedure from the town and how is that handled from your guys' end, and what is what do you recommend to?
You have to give it a little bit of more background. Let's say, for instance, our records indicate that there's a basement and 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths. Whether it was done with a permit or not, our records show that it exists. This isn't going to be an issue.
Right.
However, if our records show no finished basement, 1 bathroom and 3 bedrooms, now we're gonna perk our ears up and look a little bit different. In that case, if we find such, we're gonna, hey, do we have the 1960s knotty pine in the basement, same age as the home? Does everything look consistent? We're probably not proceeding much further than that. However, you go into the basement, or it wasn't listed under our records, and you see this octopus of 120 volt wiring, like who did it and ran. We're going to start asking questions. It's obviously work without a permit, and really this whole item is about safety. So when we're in the finished section of the basement, all looks good. We walk around to the laundry room or the unfinished part, and there's this plumbing mess with it going into a 5-gallon bucket, or something real. Then our ears perk up and we start to look. Hey, let's look into this further. Then we're going to state, hey, it looks as though work was done. This basement was finished without a permit. You need to legitimize this with zoning and building. Hopefully that answers your question. If it's consistent with what our records are showing and there's no obvious
Violations.
blatant violations or tells, if you will, we're moving on.
Okay. If you're not moving on, the seller is then required to obtain the inspections that any renovation would have needed anyway. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes and no. This I can speak to from the UCC's perspective. 20, 30 years ago, there was this whole myth that, oh my God, they're going to make me tear out the footings and foundation for that 3-foot deep addition that I put on the back of the house. And it's going to be a catastrophe. The UCC's position is that the construction official has to work around what's existing in a non-destructive manner and go ahead and proceed to legitimize the process.
Okay.
So when you go to zoning or building, your best verbiage used is, I'm coming here to legitimize work that may have been done prior to my ownership, whatever, without a permit. Once you say the word legitimize, it now, even though you're filling out some of the same paperwork, it's looked at in a different manner. It's not the same as I'm putting an addition on, I haven't done it yet, and here's my steps. So it's not as intrusive as we all had historically been led to believe. One exception, though. One exception is below BFE. If you have a home that was built after Sandy and you decided to take the storage area and completely make it into living space, put a kitchen in, that's not going to be able to be legitimate.
And actually, a good timing on that, bringing up the Sandy damaged home. If a home was deemed substantially damaged in Sandy or any flood scenario, but was renovated and has been lived in, can the seller get a MCCUO?
I'm going to say, and I don't choose these words to be sarcastic, at this point in time, yes.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because both our governing body and the state of New Jersey have they had held their ground for a long time. They kept extending that requirement.
Right.
Then they didn't extend it and said, oh, you got to make them all right. Then they kind of backed off a little bit. So we obviously backed off also. So substantially damaged will not change that. However, it will be tagged on the MCCUO or transfer title as such, substantially damaged home, so that the buyer is knowing what they're buying. At this point in time, Toms River Township is not forcing SD homes to be raised.
And Craig, what is required if a home is heated by oil? If there's a underground oil tank or an above ground oil tank, is there anything?
An oil tank certification is required along with the heat cert.
Mhm.
Above ground or below ground. This, and I'm glad you really asked it, because everybody thinks that this is a real stumbling block. But not almost, every oil distribution company is required to do an assessment of something before they put oil in it. For instance, as they approach, they're supposed to notice, are there 4 legs on the tank? Is it able to support itself? Are there any obvious leaks? If there are any of those things, they're not supposed to put oil in. Okay, so an oil company who you've been dealing with and or are dealing with can provide the documentation that this tank is able to, and it's not a certification. We got a full environmental company in, let's check the thickness of the steel. It's a basic overview that every oil supplier is required to do before they stick that nozzle in the tank. That's all we're looking for. We're looking for something to say that this tank is sound and it's able to receive oil.
If you want to touch on the lead, or I can.
Yeah, what's that on?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So there was, I think, because we
Yeah.
alluded to the new lead rules, we got a couple of questions on that topic. Is the township doing the lead inspections for rentals and or resales? And if not, who can do them?
Okay. Our ordinance is not complete yet. Our ordinance is in draft form. I think you'll find it being attempted to be submitted and adopted within the next 30 days. Our interpretation of the lead inspection, which we're required to do, is broken down into a couple different aspects. Each town and the county health departments have statistics on childhood blood lead levels. Toms River Township is below a certain threshold. And I believe the number is below 6
Yeah, 6.
and 3% below the average, above a 6 or greater readings.
Sure.
Our requirement only has to be a visual inspection, which leads to what we were talking about before, paint chips, and there's many different aspects that could lead us towards being suspect on a visual, but Toms River Township anticipates and expects to go to the visual inspection. If something comes up, and by the way, that's only on 1978 homes or older.
Sure.
1978 or newer, it's not even in play, okay? We will do the visuals as part of the CO for rental and or renewals, because they're required to be done a certain period of time. That will start as a visual. If something comes up during that visual that's suspect, we will then require the landlord or property owner or property manager to obtain a lead certification from a licensed New Jersey lead monitoring company. And this way it then falls into that.
And that's you mentioned the draft ordinance. That's your understanding of what the draft ordinance is going to.
Yes.
Going to.
Well, I was involved in writing it, so.
Sure.
Sorry.
I can tell you from somebody who works in a lot of towns that you're not alone in that. I think every town is going through exactly what Toms River is right now on that front. So, and there's no additional cost for that lead and that visual, right? That's just part of it.
There is.
Oh, there is.
For the visual inspection?
There's additional fees for the visual inspection, yes.
Okay.
Multiple parts. According to the statute, we are allowed to charge for that. We're allowed to charge for, because we're charged with keeping the records.
Sure.
So for instance, we need to obtain the lead certification and our results on every rental property in perpetuity. So we now have to create a database, monitor it, when they're due for renewal, when it's up, when it's not up, when are they exempt? Because after 10 years of good tests, they're virtually exempt.
Right.
So we're monitoring that. The other thing is we're charged with collecting a $20 fee to pay to the state
For the lead fund.
emergency lead abatement procedures that we have to forward to the state of New Jersey. So there's 3 parts. And I don't want to go ahead and give the fees for that because they're not approved yet, and that would be misleading you. So until they're approved, I can tell you though, that the open market charges $290 for a visual inspection. If the visual inspection shows some questionable things, then it's $90 each additional sample. Now, our visual, I can tell you, is anticipated to be, again, I'm not on the governing body to set that number. We're suggesting a number, but that number is substantially different because we're already there. We're already there doing a rental seal. So that drives it down. And it will include the $20 for the fund, the $20 to maintain the records, and then the fee for actually doing it.
Sure.
Our inspectors were required to do a HUD certification to be able to do the visuals. They have all achieved that certification and designation. Okay, but we can't do it until it's in order.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of Louisa and myself, I want to thank you both for taking the time today. And this was very informative for us, and hopefully everyone that joined us has found value in it. As I mentioned early on, I hope it's the start of many webinars like it throughout the area, and including repeat ones with Toms River. Your time is really and your knowledge is really valuable to us. So thank you both for taking the time.
We thank you. As for the original introduction of this ordinance, we started in January of last year, 6 months before offering the webinars. Okay, we've done a ton of them. We actually enjoy being informational because it makes our jobs easier. Communication's open. You all have my email, you have Stan's email, it's on the website. If you have any particular questions, feel free to ask. If you have groups that are meeting, we don't mind going to individual office meetings, virtually or in person. Anybody that's got any questions that wants us to come and speak, we'll be there.
Awesome.
Okay.
And Craig and Stan, I think that I speak and Matt and I speak on behalf of all the realtors out there. We really appreciate what you're doing to keep us so informed and making this process so much more streamlined. So we truly do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you and the rest of the audience.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Take care.
Have a good day.